Ladies and gentlemen, we're back today with somebody, another economist, this time a macroeconomist, Dean Baker. How you doing today, Dean?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Well, hanging in there, considering the state of things. It's not looking pretty, but there's nice things still. Nice sandwich, stuff to look forward to. Whatever. You have a good career. You work for a progressive think tank in Washington D.C. Um, very independent, very pragmatic analysis of the economy. Uh, Authored several books, The End of Loser Liberalism and Rigged, How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer. And now he's gracing us with his presence here. And I'm going to fire off some questions, put you in the hot seat, okay? Fire off
Sounds
some
good.
questions at you and see if you can answer some of these uh, things that have been on my mind. So, government shutdowns. We just had one. Apparently, they're going bananas trying to shut the government down last minute to stall for time. They've become a recurring feature of U.S. politics. So, beyond the immediate disruption, what do you see as the long-term impact on public trust in government? Is it hurting its reputation, or is its reputation already too soiled to even worry about?
Reputation is pretty bad. It can get worse. I mean, at the moment, I think most people aren't seeing much impact from this, but that could change fairly soon. So the obvious example is air traffic controllers. So if it gets to be a case, you have a lot of people can't fly. People fly for vacations, and that's annoying. But you have people who fly because a family member's sick, someone died, and needless to say, those people will be really annoyed if they can't get across country wherever they're going because their traffic controllers are they aren't being paid, they aren't coming to work. Understandable. So that's an obvious one. You have other issues it could affect a lot of people. Among the things that doesn't happen in a shutdown, people signing up for things like Social Security. So people are getting checks. If you've been getting Social Security, you're still getting that. But if you're newly eligible, you just retired or your disability, there's no one there to sign you up. And that could get to be a lot of people, and particularly the latter group, people on disability, they need that. I mean, obviously, people retiring need the money too, but maybe they could work longer. They could anticipate that perhaps, but if you're suddenly disabled, you didn't presumably anticipate that. So where people start to see more of an impact, that's going to certainly affect people's confidence in government. I mean, it's definitely a bad thing, but the longer it goes on, the more people are affected, the bigger deal it will be. And also, I should point out, as people probably know, Trump has said he's going to use this as a pretext to go after Democrats. So he's already, I guess, delayed. I don't know if he said he's canceled, but there are a number of infrastructure projects that were supposed to go to New York, Illinois, Chicago, that he's at least put on hold, if not actually canceled. And then he canceled a number of projects from the uh, Inflation Reduction Act, clean energy projects in Democratic states, just Democratic states. He's saying this is because of the shutdown. It has nothing to do with the shutdown. He has the same authority to do it with or without the shutdown. If he's saying it's because he's taking revenge for the shutdown, well, that's fine. But that's kind of silly. He's doing it because he wanted to do it. So that will that undermines confidence. It's not the shutdown. I mean, the idea that if you vote for the other party that your state gets punished, that undermines confidence for sure. But that's not the shutdown. That's Donald Trump's behavior.
Yeah. Personal grievances, and of course, anybody that's also, if you're communist or whatever, it doesn't matter. You're a Democrat at this point. Anybody on any side of the spectrum that's left is enemy of the state. And I don't think that we can afford to slow down on infrastructure projects because we're already not building enough to keep up with, say, China.
Oh, we're way behind China. And, the thing with, Biden's plan, it was to try to get us, in the ball game in areas like, photovoltaics, solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles. Trump is just throwing an axe into that. So we're nowhere in the ballpark with China. We had a long way to go to, catch up. Trump is sabotaging that, whether he understands it. I'm not going to try to get in his head. That's just the
Sure.
reality. He's sabotaging that.
think human behavior is fairly simple to figure out. If you have a dog, you know just about how people are, and with any living creature, they want to eat and they want to fuck, and then that's the end of the really. So you can bet that it's quite predictable what he's doing. And these guys that are seizing power, this is a whole nother thing where shouldn't we be following China's lead on most things as far as state sponsored, pragmatically planning from the get go to tackle certain existential problems? What do you think as an economist?
Absolutely. I mean, we should be looking to cooperate with them. I wasn't entirely pleased with what Biden was doing because it was done with the idea that we're competing, we're challenging them. Whereas things like global warming, we have a shared interest, so we should have been looking to try to cooperate where we could. That doesn't mean we'll cooperate on everything down the line, but trying to advance clean energy as much as possible, obviously domestically, internationally, that's a shared interest. So it would have made sense to try to collaborate with China. How can we do this as quickly as possible? Electric cars, they're ahead of us. I mean, we could yell and scream and hold our breath till we turn blue. That's the reality, though. So why don't we say, okay, we're going to buy some of your cars? We have a model for this. We did this with Japan back in the 80s, that they were way ahead of us in producing small cars. We produced these big gas guzzlers in the 60s and 70s. Suddenly the price of oil quadruples. People couldn't afford to pay for the gas, so they wanted more fuel efficient cars. And Japan had been producing those, so they were eating our lunch on that. So what we did was we negotiated a deal with them. We limited the number of cars that they could sell here, and then they transferred the technology. So that's when we started to see Toyota build plants here. Hyundai, all the Japanese companies built plants here. That's a good thing, but that's the sort of thing we should be negotiating, that we cooperate, we recognize that they're ahead of us, and we try to benefit from that, both in buying some number of their cars, but also getting the technology. And that should be down the line, with solar energy, with batteries, down the line. These are things we should be working together on.
Yeah, I think I hate to say it, but I think we're still stuck in a 20th century, 19th century neo-colonialist thing where we want to make Haiti's going to make our guns, our t-shirts, and they're going to do it at gunpoint. And if they don't like it, we'll overthrow their government. And we think that this can still be a thing that when, but hasn't deindustrialization just devastated our security and our strength as the Western Bloc?
Well, I wouldn't say that deindustrialization's devastated security. It obviously hurt millions of people. We lost 4 million jobs in the decade, from manufacturing jobs, decade from 2000 to 2010. That was a really big deal, and those people didn't recover. I mean, most of them are probably retirement age by now. This is 15 and 25 years ago, but their communities haven't recovered, and that's a pretty bad story in my view. But we're still a very powerful economy. But on the other hand, we should be looking forward. How do we develop the industries of the future? And, again, Biden was partly doing that. Trump's doing the exact opposite. We have tariffs on toys from China. So we think it's important we produce toys here. I mean, I don't care. I'm not objecting to us producing toys, but I
A
wouldn't
percent, a
have them.
percentage of toys, it would be okay. Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a matter of government policy for me. If it ended up people wanted to buy toys that were made in the U.S., great. But if all our toys were imported from China and other places, that's kind of fine by me too. So the thing is, focus on the key industries, and that's what Biden was trying to do. Did he do a great job of it? He didn't do it perfectly, but he did make real progress. And
Hmm.
Trump's trying to sabotage that. I shouldn't say trying. He's saying that he is sabotaging it, and he's saying he's sabotaging it. So it's not I'm putting any words in his mouth.
You think the job reports are faulty at some point? Is there incentives to fudge these job reports? Because recently there was 300 jobs were added, and then they took back like a third of them. It seemed
No,
fishy.
well, let me make 2 points on that. One is that I do worry going forward because Trump has, well, he fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we have to be concerned that he is going to try to, manipulate the numbers. I don't think that's happened to date. There's a lot of very good, honest people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics who are going to tell us if he does that, and they'll quit. So
Right.
we'll know. We'll know. Um, The revisions, this is something politicians play games with. If they took a few minutes, people at BLS would be happy to talk to them. It's all on their website, but if they want someone to explain it to them, they'd do that. You want to get numbers quickly. So we didn't get the September numbers because of the shutdown, but we wanted to get the September numbers quickly. So they were supposed to come out last Friday. They didn't because of the shutdown. But they do a survey, gives you a jobs number. They still have that survey out. So they're going to get more people answer the survey. Not everyone answered in September. So some numbers are going to come in October. They revise it based on ones that come in October. Then more will come in November. They revise it based on the numbers that come in November. There's nothing improper going on. It's just they're trying to get the best number they can.
Is it in the
So
is it in the best interest of any other party to post jobs that aren't really to be filled? Like there's no purpose for them to say that, or is there? To create jobs that aren't actually vacancies, that are just there to make it seem, because look, AI automation is going to wipe out, and I think they're going to keep mass unemployment really tucked away until people look around and go, I'm starving to death, I'm going to eat my neighbor's dog. And then they say, oh, well, then they talk about universal basic income. This is what I think.
yeah, well, we're far from mass unemployment. The unemployment rate's still pretty low, and I believe those numbers. And again, we have a number of different sources. It's not just from the government or
Okay,
private sources,
I trust you,
and
Dean.
they all tell a similar story. So you'd have to have a really really big conspiracy for all these different sources to be
Okay,
coming up with the same story.
I don't want to go down that road, so if you say so, I'll leave it to you. But I'm just watching the West. It seems like a lot of corruption and for profit. We squandered our gifts. We've been hornswoggled by the very wealthy. That's my take. So you written about creative ways to measure economic health, which I'm always learning about in new ways. You've looked at consumer spending patterns, and uh, you had an unconditional indicator such as your fast food index. So can you help us understand if the lived reality of the economy in ways GDP cannot? What are some other great metrics? Because I also learned about, you have your per capita, you have your nominal, you have your uh, purchase power parity, a lot going on. So please.
Yeah, so one issue with GDP, if we just looked at GDP or total consumption, is it could be driven by what wealthy people are doing. So if you take the top 20% of the income distribution, they account for more than half of income, more than half of consumption. So if we see consumption rose by 3% in the first half of 225, which it did, something like that, a lot less than that, but in any case, something like that, we'll just say. We don't know whether that reflects, pretty much everyone increasing their consumption by 3%, or whether it was the wealthy who maybe did by 4 or 5 or 6%, and the bottom half, bottom quarter, whatever, maybe they're actually consuming less. So I decided fast food was an interesting thing to look at. It's not to make any claim that's a comprehensive measure of well-being or anything. Probably better if people ate less fast food. But in any case, the logic here is if we look at, again, overall spending, could be Elon Musk is buying more, whatever he buys. And if we look at restaurant spending, again, same story. People made a lot of money in the stock market. They go out, have more big meals, or their bigger meals, more expensive meals. Fast food would not likely be like that. Now, maybe Elon Musk eats at McDonald's. I have no idea. But I don't believe he eats at McDonald's more because the price of Tesla stock went up.
Interesting.
So the logic here is that if we see fast food sales go up, it's very much a discretionary spending in the sense that people make a choice. They're eating at the restaurant rather than cooking at home. So it's very much a discretionary choice. And if it goes up, it's likely because more middle, moderate income people, lower income people have more money, and they're making that decision that they'll eat out, they'll go to the McDonald's, the Taco Bell, whatever, rather than eat at home. So I think that's a good measure of what, more people more down the income ladder are seeing, and doesn't tell a good story. So it was actually interesting to me because they revised the data recently for 224, and what it shows was spending in 224 actually began to stagnate, and that continued in 225. So the number for our most recent numbers from August, and in August of 225, they were basically spending the same amount as December of 223. So it had been rising rapidly. We were well above the pre-pandemic level, in 223, but it pretty much stopped rising. So it's been basically flat for the last, that's a little more than a year and a half now, a year and 2/3. So that tells me most people don't feel they're doing very well. And, again, not a comprehensive measure, but, I
Sure.
think that's a simple story.
Based on the probability, not a perfect rule, but or a silver bullet, but based on probability that is probably true. As a poor person growing up, I can attest. Yes, you go right to the Taco Bell, especially because poor people don't have a lot of cooking experience or cook like stuff in the cupboards to make stuff out of. You don't have spices when you're poor. It's either that or Totino's party pizza. You know. So the growth figures for the first half of 2025, they came in at 1.6%, but you're stressed that the top line numbers can hide fragility. So what underlying trends should we be paying a closer attention to? Because I also am confused by the detachment of the economy from sort of the reality for what the people are living. And I think they should affect each other more. So what are some of the fragile points?
Well, I look at wage growth. I think that's hugely important for most people. Most people get most of their income from wages. And insofar as possible, we want to look at wage growth up and down the wage ladder. So, if Silicon Valley engineers are seeing big pay increases, I mean, good for them, but that doesn't do you a lot of good if you're working at a fast food restaurant. So we want to look at up and down the ladder. And one of the stories that was underappreciated in the Biden years was that you actually saw a very good wage growth, well in excess of prices, um, down the wage ladder. So workers at the 10th decile, so 10% of workers earn less, 90% or more, they saw their wages rise by 15% more than prices over the years 219 to 224. That's pretty good. I mean, it's not great in the sense that, if you're working for $15 an hour in today's dollars in 219, and then that was 17.25 an hour in 224, you're not doing great. I mean, you'd be nuts to say someone earning 17.25 an hour is doing great. But on the other
Yeah.
hand, that's a lot better than 15. So that was actually a good story. But that's what I like to look at. I look at wage growth up and down the income ladder. And what we've seen actually, into 225 is it seems to have stopped growing lower down the income ladder. So we're still seeing decent wage growth higher up, not great, but decent wage growth higher up. But further down the income ladder, we're not seeing much. The other story, and we're looking at fragility in the economy, a very huge portion of economic growth is being either driven directly or indirectly by artificial intelligence.
Mm.
And what I mean is the industry itself. I don't mean that people are adopting it in restaurants, which is happening, but I don't.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. I mean literally the industry itself. People being paid to come up with new models, and paying for the computing centers, paying for the electricity for the compute. That's a very large share of growth. And not I alone, but I and many others think this is a bubble that we lived through the tech bubble in the 90s, and similar story that you had huge investment in the tech sector, and the stock market exploded. I'm thinking 97, 98, 99, 2000, then crashed in 2000 to 2002. And like the NASDAQ, where many of the tech stocks, I should say most of the tech stocks were, it lost like 70% of its value. The rest of the market lost value too. So the overall market lost about 50%, but the tech stocks lost like 70%. Some of them literally went out of business.
Mhm.
So I think we're in for that sort of crash. Now, the timing, who knows? In the late 90s, I was looking at it, I was going, it's a bubble, it's a bubble, it's a bubble. I would have expected to burst much sooner.
Yeah.
In the zeros, we had a housing bubble. And, again, I was looking at this and go, this is a bubble. This is going to be bad news. But I never expected it to last as long as it did. I first started talking about in 2002. It didn't really start to crash until 2000. I should say turned down until 2006. It didn't really start to crash till 2007. So it went on way longer than I would have expected. So don't ask me when this AI bubble will crash, but I feel pretty confident it will, and
Is it
probably not.
is won't it all come at the same time? We got the house. There's certainly another housing bubble as well because no, imports for building houses are getting harder to get because of the supply chain disruptions and the inflation, and then you also have developers buying up too many of them and then creating artificial scarcity. And what do you think of the chances of all of this going to?
I wouldn't say there's a housing bubble. I wouldn't be surprised if house prices fall some. I've been saying that. And they actually have been falling a little bit, but not a crash like we had in 2007 to 2009, 2010. There you saw nationwide prices fall around 30% in the peak bubble areas, places like Phoenix, the Inland Valley in California. They fell by 50%. I don't see anything like that. Could they fall 5 or 10%? Sure. But that's not really because of a bubble. This has really been driven by the fundamentals of the market. So the difference between what I saw in the zeros and what we saw with the run up in house prices around the pandemic was that it does look like the second run up, the pandemic run up, was driven by the fundamentals in the market. Rents were rising very rapidly too. So that to me suggested that you actually had a big demand for housing. Vacancy rates fell through the floor. So it all the measures suggested you have a very tight housing market. In the zeros, that wasn't true. Rents weren't really rising rapidly. They pretty much would continued, if you just did a graph, went from the 90s to the 2000s, same growth, roughly at the overall rate of inflation, nothing much going on there. Vacancy rates were actually fairly high. So that was why, I felt very confident saying this is a bubble, this is a bubble, this is a bubble. If I looked at those measures today, looks to me like it's the fundamentals of the market. Now, if you saw stock prices crash, then people might want to buy a home based on the fact they just made 200,000 in the stock market. Well, if they just lost 200,000, they're less likely to buy a home. So that will have an impact, but it won't mean the crash just because it's not. We don't have a hugely overvalued housing market. It is being driven by the fundamentals. And one more step there, we had in the zeros when we had the bubble, we saw massive building of housing. We were building over 2 million units a year at the peak. After the collapse, and the housing bubble collapsed in 2007, 2008, we were building at one point less than a million, and we just gradually inched up. So we were at around 1.4 million when the pandemic hit, and that's pretty much where we are today. So, maybe that's the right number. I'd have to look more carefully, say, what would be, not that I know exactly the right number, but,
Sure,
ballpark number.
sure.
Maybe something like that's a ballpark number, but we went 10 years of massive underbuilding from, say, 2008 to 2019.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, it's wild. And the homeless population in the United States, something about 700,000 right now, and there's vacant homes are about 14.9 million. So this goes against what I would personally like to see happen in China's model, where 90% home ownership rate, but you don't quite own the ground underneath it, and yet you can get a lease from the state for 99 years or something like this. Again, I think China might be having more futuristic ideas about how their society should be run. And it's kind of interesting. I'm learning Chinese right now, just to.
Oh, good. I wish I knew it. I know English, and that's pretty much it. I mean, a little bit here and there in terms of French and some other languages, but
I think
English
I can
is.
say. I think I say "wo bushi megu," and that means I don't like America. Uh, so, and also I had to stress that 30% of the manufacturing in China, the GDP in China is manufacturing, right? Stop me if I'm wrong. 20% in Germany and then 10% in the United States. But most of that is dependent on foreign labor and foreign goods. Now, is that true?
The number here for manufacturing in terms of shared GDP would probably be around 14, 15%. I haven't looked at recently, but somewhere around there. So it's somewhat higher than 10%. Depending on the labor here is overwhelmingly, U.S. citizens. Obviously, we have some people who are immigrants,
Well, let's say things that are made from somewhere else, like electronic parts from China that are
Oh,
necessary for.
we have a thoroughly integrated supply chain, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But if you looked at a car, you have parts from very much Canada and Mexico, but you have a lot of parts that come from China, come from other places. So it's a globalized supply chain, and again, I don't see that as a bad thing,
You don't
but
see
it's
the bad
definitely
thing. I think
no, no.
we differ on that, but that's fine because you have more experience and I have no credibility to disagree. So, but I feel like with all the imperialism and militarism that we've gone through in the United States and sort of that upper hand that we've had, I'd like to look at it differently. Especially, I was just reading about Burkina Faso and them taking back nationalizing their their gold mines and stuff, which was an extension of colonialism that we took over. They have French money still. It just seems a tad bit unfair if we're going to start a new paradigm of humanity where we all have to, like you said, team up. We gotta think together on this. So, um, speaking of bleeding hearts like myself, wages, productivity, and inequality remain tightly intertwined. So, where do you see the biggest gaps in how the economy is reported and what's being experienced by your working class people? And what have you seen over the course of your life?
Well, I was mentioning before, I like to look at wage growth and wage growth for typical workers. So if you go back, we talk about golden age from after, I'm older than you, the post-war period, post-World War II. I sometimes say post-war, and people go, "Which war?" No one said that when I was growing up. World War II
Oh,
was
the
the
big
war.
war. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So anyhow, from the end of World War II till 73, we saw very good economic growth, and it was broadly shared. So workers up and down the income distribution had large gains, year to year in real wages. So about 2.5% a year. And if you think about that for a moment, just take that over 10 years, it's about 30%. So imagine, your purchasing power is 30% higher this year than it was, say, in 215. That's a story you could tell in the 50s and 60s. Things were going the right direction. And it was very tangible. People could buy cars. Again, I don't necessarily think we had the best development model. Would have been great if we had more mass transit. Would have been great if we built up our cities instead of everyone moving in the suburbs. But those were what people thought of as improvement in living standards. And they were a real big deal. Televisions. Everyone had television by 1970. No one had television in 1950. So you get a whole list of things like that that meant big improvements in living standards. Um, Late after we get to the real turning point is the 80s. So I won't go in the 70s. There are issues there, oil price increases, whatever. I know, a complicated story. The 80s, we began to see this big divergence where most of the benefits of growth were going to those at the top, say 10% of the income distribution. And it's important to point out, most of it was actually in the wage side. So if you looked at from 1980 to 2000, there's very little change in the profit share of income. So it wasn't that the companies were getting it as profits. What was going on was is going to high-end wage earners, which would include CEOs. They pay, went off the charts in that period, the 80s and 90s. So it went from being 20 or 30 times the pay of ordinary workers to 200 or 300. That really happened that period. But you also saw, STEM workers, people were lucky enough to get good jobs in Silicon Valley. They got really rich. Doctors were very highly paid. They were always highly paid, but they got much more highly paid. Wall Street guys, you have people on Wall Street. I said guys, and that's probably appropriate. But in any case, people working on Wall Street, a lot of them became, millionaires and billionaires. So they were the big beneficiaries. After 2000, what you saw was, again, the top end got a disproportionate share of the gains from growth, but there you saw a shift to profits. So we've seen a significant shift to profits between, say, 2000 and, well, the present 225. And a lot of factors there. Clearly, concentration is a big factor. In the pandemic, one of the things that was striking, and I was originally a skeptic here, you saw that a lot of companies took advantage. We saw this idea of seller's inflation, so people called it greedflation, where they jacked up their prices. They took advantage of the shortages. And, I was saying I was a skeptic because I go, yeah, there's a shortage, price will go up. You expect that. But they clearly, prices were going up much more than their cost, and they stayed there. So you've seen that the gains from growth disproportionately went to profits in the period, the last quarter century. So long and short, people lower down the pay ladder, typical worker, someone at the 20th percentile, they've seen gains. So I'm not going to say they got nothing from the last, 45 years, but nowhere near their share. It's a very, very different story from what we saw in the quarter century following World War II.
And the buying power is always just edging away from them as the wage might increase or things get better, and then some other metric turns sour on them, and the middle class just can't get a foothold on what they used to have.
Well, I'm adjusting for prices. So, this is wages have outpaced prices since 1980.
I,
Not by
I'm
as much as they should have, but they
now
have.
let's go back to this manufacturing, because you don't seem too keen on the idea of bringing it back. Well, I think it seemed to be important because the decline in the American thing was about the time the auto workers left, about the time, or the auto companies left and outsourced everything and turned Detroit and the whole Rust Belt into what it is today around that time. And then is it not important that this choke point in the South China Sea, where 90% of the world's exported goods go through this channel, instead of being so interested militarily in, you know, being in that region, why don't we just claw back our own manufacturing base so that we don't have to have that 90% reliance on that?
Well, we don't have 90% reliance. What we need to do is figure out what are the key industries, and make sure that we've access. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be produced here. So if we're getting our steel from Canada, I'm not
Close
too worried.
enough.
Well,
Close
actually,
enough.
with Trump, I'm worried about, but
Sure.
ordinarily, you don't have to worry about being able to get our steel from Canada. And even for that matter, from Europe, again, we can envision a story where at war with China and they're sinking, that could happen. But, that's kind of far removed, I guess I'd say. I wouldn't worry about that as a first priority. We should try to make sure we're not at war with China. I would say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it would, and if we were, I would hope we could protect our shipping lanes between it's
At, you
Europe and the
know,
U.S. We're closer to each other than either is to China.
out of all the motivations that I could research to truly understand why is Taiwan so important, the underlying fact was that this was a major shipping route to an extent that I never thought, that was so important. And I think that's
There is a massive amount of shipping, and it's one of the things I think is actually underappreciated here. It's just how enormous China's trade is in the world. If I saw a map recently where it shows the whole world, and it colors the countries by who their major trading partner is. And for almost everyone, it's China. I mean, for the European
yeah,
countries, it's other European countries. So for Germany, it's France. But if you treat the EU as a bloc, I'm pretty sure China would be the largest trading
yeah,
partner with the EU, more than the U.S. So China has gotten to be like far and away the largest, most important trading nation in the world, and that's reality. We should recognize we don't want to be dependent on goods from China for something important. I was talking to someone earlier. I was saying, well, if we got all our toys from China, and we had some conflict, hopefully not an armed conflict, but we're angry at them about something and they stopped sending us toys, that would be unfortunate. But,
well, the kids
presumably,
the kids all get pine cones
yeah,
and rocks
we
for
could
Christmas.
figure out how to deal with it, so, but there are things. One of the big issues with Taiwan, of course, they were a major supplier of advanced computer chips, and Biden actually took, I thought, a very good measure to try to rectify that. That we had the Chips Act, which but it was very successful in leading companies to build computer, factories for producing chips here. And that's what we want. And that was a really good thing to do. But when you get to something like clothes, like toys, we need those. But I mean, if they're cut off for a period of time, we could live with that and figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, and don't play down the China's ability to reverse engineer things when you subcontract your labor and your factories to other countries, which China became the world's factory. Then innovations can happen, I think, faster. And I think that's why a diversity of manufacturing domestically would actually spice up our innovation abilities too. Because maybe you have an idea for software, but you can't get the hardware without, importing from China. Maybe that's not a feasible business model.
Well, at this point, they're not taking technology from us. It's going more the other way. And
Really?
well, in a lot of areas, certainly in clean energy, they're miles ahead of us. Battery technology, they're miles
Right.
ahead of us. Electric vehicles are miles ahead of us. So I'm not going to say it's everywhere, but in some very important sectors, they're ahead of us. In others, they're probably very close. AI, they're, I'm
They'll
not enough
edge
of
you
an
on.
expert.
Look, the communists with their state-sponsored gig where they got 20% higher, subsidies for anything that sounds like it could be pragmatically useful, they do it. And we're over here trading bitcoins. Oh, bitcoins! Everybody's going crazy with it. It's a sad state of affairs. They made it illegal over there. China's like, we don't want anything to do with that casino money.
Yeah, well, it's the obsession here with Bitcoin, particularly with the Trump administration, or cryptocurrency, I should say more generally.
Sure,
It really is nuts.
it's bad. We're a country of grifters, founded by grifters, ran by grifters. Cash Patel was on his social media today showing off his new clothing line. I thought, oh God,
Oh my
God, what's next? All right, so let's go a few more questions, and we'll let you get back to the decline of Western civilization. Um, You've critiqued the political attachment to the free market as kind of a mythology. So, what would be a more honest framing of markets and government intervention? Look, how would it look like, and how could it shift the political conversation? So, what are we supposed to do?
Well, we have this, I'll call it a myth, whatever you want to call it, view of the market and the government, that you have the market over here and it does whatever it does. And then you have the government over here that tries to regulate the market or redistribute, however you want to say it. And what I've always argued is no, the government structures the market. So there is no market out there. There's a market that's structured by the government, and it's not a minor thing. It's a really, really big thing. So I was talking before about how we built the highways that were the basis of the post-war growth. That we suburbs. You didn't have had suburbs without the national highway system. That made it possible. Maybe it wasn't a good thing. Maybe we should have had more mass transit. I would prefer that, but nonetheless, that supported a whole path of growth. The most obvious thing today that I point to are patent and copyright monopolies.
Right.
We will spend $700 billion a year on prescription drugs because we gave the companies monopolies, government monopolies. If we snapped our fingers, we just said free market. Anyone can produce any drug they want. You know how to produce it, manufacture it, sell it. Instead of spending $700 billion, we'd spend $150 billion. Huge difference. I mean, these are enormous sums. I mean, that difference, $550 billion, is about $4,000 for every household in the country. That's a really big deal. We also give the drug industry, we do spend about $50 billion on basic research, mostly through the National Institutes of Health, but other government agencies. Huge subsidy. So you can't look at that and say we have a free market. Same with copyright software. Where would software be without patent and copyright monopolies? Nowhere. And Bill Gates got very rich with those. So my point is just that the market is structured by the government. We don't have a market out there and a government over here. We have a market structured by the government, which we have to recognize, and that's yours and mine, and decide how to best structure it. So hitting on the case with prescription drugs, I would pay for the research up front. Let's sell the drugs in a free market. And to my mind, it's absolutely obscene that someone's got cancer and the cancer drug costs or they're charging $100,000 for it. And then they have to figure out, can they get their insurer to pay, or are they going to do a GoFundMe? Well, it doesn't actually cost $100,000. Probably costs $500, maybe $1,000 for the drug company to manufacture and distribute. It's very rare that drugs are actually expensive to manufacture and distribute. So if you just said, we'll pay for the research up front, it costs money. No one disputes that. Pay for it up front, and then just let anyone manufacture it and sell it who wants. And then in almost all cases, I'd say they'd be very cheap. So that would be the sort of way that I would suggest thinking about it. Again, I focus on drugs because it's a shitload of money and it's people's health. So it's hugely important. But we need to think clearly, how are we structuring the market?
And this boils down to something that I don't think anybody's really wanting to talk about, the meta of the situation, which is this comes down to a philosophical question, human to human, whether or not suffering is okay. Whether or not suffering is okay, whatever reason that you give it, because I worked hard, because my daddy gave me all this money, and then these people I can subjugate them, because I think this is what makes communism, even all the failed attempts at it, so appealing, is because under communist regimes, maybe they had some troubles, but women were treated equally. Minorities were treated equally. They had murals of people working together, And so the Marxist kind of underlying thing where it's like, take care of the greater good first and then worry about your growth and innovation and stuff. Some people aren't going to get that. Some people aren't going to agree to that. And other people think of it like, for me, this is basic common sense. I think they taught me kind of this in kindergarten. It wasn't until I was older that I said, no, don't share with anybody. Don't help that homeless guy. Then they beat the empathy out of you. They go, no, he's homeless because he did something wrong.
Yeah, well,
Jesus.
to be clear, I didn't think of myself as arguing for communism. I'm just saying this is how capitalism works, and we should just look at it with clear eyes.
No, I mean you're centrist. I mean, I'm far left. I think we need to burn. I'm waiting. I'm hoping, and honestly, I'm not trying to find answers. I'm just pointing out what's wrong because ultimately, I think humanity, like George Carlin says, is a failed experiment, just circling the drain. Because I also interview a lot of people about biodiversity collapse and what's going to happen with that microplastics. I know it all. This is my forte, is just reading all this horrible shit. Um, and so no, I don't really. I like communism, but I can't stand communists. They're assholes too. So what are you gonna do? Um, Dean Baker, wonderful human being. Thanks for spending some time with me. You gonna come back and do it again?
Sure thing. I enjoyed it. So, yeah,
Not.
let's
I'm
hope
not.
that,
Not the average podcast. Just a little bit funnier. I'm
yeah.
all right.
No, and your dog had something to say too. So anyhow, yeah, no, I
She's a
enjoyed it.
little upset, so I gotta go. So, well, we'll see. Let's chat right after this. I'll wave. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.